Hari Om. Let's start with a prayer. Om Samasta Jana Kalyane Niratam Karunamayam Namami Chinmayam Devam Sadgurum Brahma Vidvaram Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanura Mardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum Tvameva Mata Cha Pita Tvameva Tvameva Bandhusya Sakha Tvameva Tvameva Vidya Dravidam Tvameva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva Tvameva Sarvam Gurudeva Deva. Hari Om. We are doing a series on why Advaita. It's from a perspective of a material scientist, and we are now looking at how knowledge takes place, and we covered in terms of Pratyaksha Pramanam, or we are covering Pratyaksha Pramanam. So according to the traditional view, the mind, when I say something, I am seeing an object, what exactly the process involved, as per the Mimamsa position, which Advaita also subscribes to, and many other acharyas of different matas also subscribe this, is that mind goes out along with the senses and grasps the object, and senses gather the attributes of the object, feed into the mind, and it forms a vritti, a thought. A modification of the mind is called vritti, a thought, and contents of the thought are the attributes of the object, and that from that attribute, that's a cognitive process, and a recognition takes place, and say this is a book, this is a table. If I already have that information that this type of object with these attributes are called books, and this object with these attributes are called the table. That's how the Nyaya philosophy comes up with a jati, a set of attributes that define a table as a table, and a chair as a chair, and so on and so forth. Human being as a human being, animal as an animal, and all that. These are called jatis, means a set of attributes that are characterizing, from which we can determine what species it belongs to. In science you call phylum and all that, in biology. So classification was done even in Vedanta also at that time by Nyaya. The Nyaya was developed in Gautama, and it's a prehistoric. And the new Nyaya, Navya Nyaya logic was developed in the 11th century. So that's how our ancient, our traditional thinkers were. And now coming back to the Pratyaksha Pramanam, this is sense of sight, and the sense of hearing, and sense of smell. These are the three that really you can say the mind is going out. But when it comes to sense of touch and sense of taste, object has to come in contact with the senses. So those two senses where it's not the mind going out, because mind cannot going out and taste what it is. By looking at the attributes of the object, I can say, hey, it is this taste. But whether it is a salt or a sugar, I cannot see from the looking at it from a distance, because they both look whitish type, and say the form and the color may look the same. So one cannot determine unless I put that onto my tongue and say, hey, this is a salt and this is a sugar. By looking, I cannot say it. So obviously the object has to come in contact with the senses for me to form appropriate vritti to determine what it is. This is so two of the five senses where mind doesn't go. But from the point of science now, looking at the scientific way of looking at it, since we are talking about a perspective of a scientist, so it's not the mind going out, and the mind is a subtle material of the brain, like a software, and the brain is the hardware, And now, because we know, we are familiar with the computer terminology, so you need a hardware for the software to function, and mind is a software and cannot be seen, but one has to open it in order to see what it is and test it. Same way, if the hardware is a brain, you can open it and see. All you can see is some cells, and that's all you can gather from the hardware. Same way, if I open a computer, all you see all sorts of hardware there. How they function, we don't know. So all these things are somewhat parallel, and the perception occurs when I look at an object. So my eyesight has to be there, and my mind also behind my eyes. So when I look at an object, I see an object. And we said, if it is too dark, I cannot see the object. So I need a light also to illumine the object. These are common sense, but if you understand it, see how important it is. So if there is an object there, let's say a chair there, and I cannot see the chair unless there is a light there. Now light doesn't bring the chair into existence. Chair should be there. And light only illumines what is there, whether the presence of a chair or absence of a chair. Absence of the chair only because I know what chair is and I'm looking around. There is no object with those attributes of the to call it a chair. So there may be tables and other things. I say there is no chair here. So how do you know? I can see. I thought you cannot see anything. If the chair is there, you can see. But if the chair is absent, how can you see? So absence of the chair is also knowledge. That's what in the Advaita, one of the means of knowledge is also abhava. So absence is also noticeable, provided I know the attributes of the object that is missing there, and I don't see any object with those attributes. So here we are coming to a point where a chair is a chair because it has certain attributes, and that defines a chair. And any definition of an object is one that has attributes which can distinguish that object from all other objects around the world. So essentially I need to have a unique attribute that differentiates that particular object separate from the rest of the objects based on the attributes. So attributive content defines an object. Now we go into an object. Object is the one that has attributes. And that also attributes are two types. One is the tadastha lakshanam, the incidental attributes. Other is the intrinsic attributes. So incidental attributes and the intrinsic attributes, let's call it that way. So what is incidental attributes? Suppose I say a table, a chair on the table. So do you see any chair on the table? So I looked around, I see a lot of chairs, but I don't see any chair on any table. So I said no. So how do I know? Because I see only tables without a chair. So I should have a incidental qualification where the table should be there, and top of which associated with a chair, or chair should be associated with a table. So that's called sambandham. A relationship should be there, and that relation is a temporal relationship. Because I can remove the chair from that, it's not a permanent relationship that chair has to be permanently on the table. Then it's a different story. That's a permanent relationship. But these are called tadastha lakshanam, incidental qualification. So this is a famous example is that, in most of in states, all houses are done mass scale. They all look alike. So you want to take and you want to show, looking at the top of some building, you want to show where John's house is, but every house look alike from there and looking from the top, and so you're looking how I can point where John's house. And suddenly I saw a crow sitting there, a crow, and landed there and sat on John's house. Then I can say, hey, do you see the crow there? Yes. The house on which crow is sitting is John's house. So now he knows what is John's house compared to rest of the house. Next time when he takes his friend and he wants to show, hey, where is John's house? I heard you know where John's house. Oh, let me see where the crow is going to sit. So that's not a permanent relationship. That's only incidental relationship for identifying John's house compared to the other objects, and that is called a sambandham, a relationship between a crow and the house, a temporal relationship. And the definition of the Brahman is also Janma Jasya Yataha, from which the whole universe came, by which it is sustained, into which it goes back. Yatova imani bhutani jayante, ena jatani jivanti, yat prayam tabisham vishanti, tad vijnasasva, tad brahmeti. That is Brahman. What? From which the whole universe rose, by which it is sustained, into which it goes back. So that is a definition provided to identify a Brahman compared to any other. But that is also defined as a tatastha lakshanam. Why? Because Brahman cannot be defined. And that's because Brahman is infinite. So you are using an incidental qualification, and it is that from which the whole universe came, by which it is sustained, into which it goes back. So it is not any Tom, Dick and Harry here cannot be Brahman, because the universe didn't come from him. So we are using a definition to point out in the direction to exclude all other things that do not fit the definition. And what fits we cannot say, but what doesn't fit we can say. So by process of negation we are arriving at the truth there. That's called tatastha lakshanam. Now we define, so that's attributes which are incidental attributes. There are intrinsic attributes that define object identities. That's what a chemistry does. A chemist student in the lab, he wants to find out what the substance is, so he will determine what are its physical properties and what are its chemical properties. What happens if you puts in the flame test or this test, that test, all says how it behaves. And therefore the attribute of the object or its property of the object is determined, and from the property you arrive at what is the nature of that chemical is. That's how you process of elimination and then zeroing in based on the attributes or properties. So by definition now we say object is the one that has attributes. And attributes are different from the locus of attributes. These are simple things, but we need to know the attribute is different from the locus of attribute, but the vishesham, that is object, attribute means the property is different from the material that has a property. So example is the sweetness of the sugar. Sweetness is different from sugar. Sugar is a element, but the substance there, it happens to have a property of sweetness. And the other one which looks like a sugar, and when you put it on the tongue, it is salty, so we call it as a salt, and it has a property of saltness there. So an object is one that has attributes. Attributes are locus in an object. So definition of an object is that which has attributes. If there are no attributes, then I cannot define an object. Conversely, every object must have an attribute. What is an attribute? That differentiates one object from other objects in the world. So we have now any object is in the world that I see. World is nothing but a lot of objects. So when I see an object, what do I really see? So first I said we need a light. Light will shed on it, and in the light I see. So what do I see from a distance? If there is a book there, I see a shape of a book and some attributes that I can define what book looks like. So those from the attributes that I can see, I say that's a book. But how exactly that knowledge takes place? So in this case, according to science, so when the light falls on the object, So if it's a chair, light falls on the object, light gets reflected by the object. So that falling on the object, it gets reflected, reaches my retina and forms an image which is transmitted to the brain by the electrical nervous system, optical nervous system, through charges. That much we can tell. And we may perhaps put electrodes and find out what kind of charges and how the waveform or whatever form of the charges, that also measurable through, that means charge is indirectly measured through the property of the charges, and that's all we can do from science point. Then what happens? This is the same way what happens when you program into the computer, you're giving an instruction and typing something, then what happens? That typing that something you are doing, it has to be converted into a software. And for that, you need a program language. A program code has to be there, whether it's a C++ or some other code, has to convert this electrical signal of plus minus signs into the language that machine can understand and communicate with itself, and then turn it back again into the language that I can understand. And that's called program code. And we are all computer guys, we are familiar with, without the proper program software, you may have a big computer, it doesn't work. You need a software. That's what we say. Software is like a subtle material required to function in the gross material. Without the subtle material, the gross material is useless. Same way, without the brain has to have a mind, a software to function on the brain. So mind is a software, brain is a hardware. And when the electrical signal that comes from the optical system through the brain, then God has provided a program code that converts the electrical signal into software called thought. That we know based on our analysis of the computer, hardware, software. We need to have program code, and the program code Lord has put in the brain, and everybody has those program codes. It's a universal code, and you cannot really break that code to find out what it is. So all science can say somehow. Quote means we don't know. And the black box of somehow is there that converts the electrical signal of neurons into a thought process. And a thought is developed. This much. So thought is called vritti. So whether the mind runs and brings back an information and forms a vritti, or from the science point, the information is brought in into electrical signal, which converts into a software, into thought process. End result is there is a vritti in the mind. That much. So from there on is the same. But let's go back again. So what I see when I see a chair, I'm saying the reflection of the form, the reflection of the light, comes to my mind. What comes is the light that is falling on it, and wherever depending on the form of the light and the position, I get reflection, and on that process an image is formed, just like a photographic image. So photographic image represents your photo because the light is shed on it. If there is no enough light, you put a flashlight, and reflected light is what is captured by the film and depends upon how the reflection is. If it is too dark, you may not be able to recognize the pictures, but if it is too bright also, you cannot. So you need to have shades and all that, and depending upon the types of dresses and colors and all that, reflection is also, if the color film, reflection also occurs and reciprocates in some form depending upon the film and the processing, that particular colors will be revealed. And same way the brain also functions. So what I see in the photo is not a real material, Real product is somewhere. You're standing there in front and I'm taking a picture and the picture has a photo. And the photo is different from you. So, and what exactly captures in the photo? It is a reflection of the light only, depending on the attributes of the object. Attributes belong to the object. Attributes cannot leave the object. If it is a sugar, is sweet, sweetness belongs to the sugar. Sweetness cannot be removed from the sugar. So they have locus in the object. So senses cannot take these attributes, but it can only take reflection of the attributes, just as the reflection of the light is coming, and that is only projected on the screen. So it's only reflected form. Form is the shape and color. Both come when I see an object. And a form similar to that is formed in the mind, because I have two eyes, and because of that I get a stereographic projection where not only the flat but also depth of the figure also comes into picture, and three-dimensional picture of the image is what I see. And that's exactly how the mind also works. So the image is different from the material. So when I see an object chair is only out there. I'm only seeing its projected image as a frontal, that whatever the light can imagine from the angle in which it is projecting. And if there is a board and I'm seeing, I don't see backside of the board, because it's not like a mind grasping the whole object. Even there only I'm seeing only frontal. So science is actually more accurate in that sense. The information is brought in to form an image called a vritti. So this much is a poem. From the vritti point on, the science doesn't have much to say, because this is a things that I cannot measure. The thought cannot be measured other than some disturbance in the electrical signal. But every thought is different, every perception is different, and that's all part of the beauty of the mind itself. Is the mind matter, or does it matter? Whether the mind is something else is a big debate. The psychologists say something about the mind, and the philosophers have different opinion of the mind, and everybody using the mind, and they don't know what it is. So science has limitations, the objective science, and scientists want to know where is God, and they can't see properly even the thought process, and they are thinking at the same time they are denying what God is and so on and so forth, because they cannot see. It's a problem of the limitations of the objective sciences. Objective can analyze only objective entities using objective tools, and that are measurable. If I want to use a very smallest one, I have to use a microscope, and if I have to use a distant one, I have to use a telescope. These are the tools that I need in order to see. But what is there has to be there, and it has to be perceptible. All that has to be understood. So limitations of the science also to be important. To what extent science can explain also we have to use where science is. Now what we got from this? Number one, I cannot see an object. What I see is reflection of the object only. That's what the thought is. If my mind is not there, I cannot have thought. Therefore, I cannot see. That's why in the deep sleep state, you may bring all sorts of objects. My mind is not there to perceive. My senses are not functioning, and therefore, no world outside. Therefore, in the deep sleep state, I don't see any world. So, because now that shows that mind is required, mind has to be functioning. And also my senses have to be functioning enough in order to capture the information, essential information that comes from the object. So if I want to see, I should have the 20/20 vision in order to see properly. Otherwise I have to augment my vision by the glasses or spectacles in order to see. So I cannot read otherwise unless I have spectacles. So it's not the problem, it's problem my defect of my eye defect, sense defect, and that has to be corrected to some extent. As we get older, we cannot hear, and we may put hearing aids and all that up to some point only, because it's the limitations of the senses and not limitations of the object wise. Even if the mind can see, senses cannot see. So you have senses can also cause problems in terms of the perception, and the mind, if it is not there and out somewhere else, it can also cannot see. Even though object is right there, his mind is somewhere else, he cannot see. That's why you see a lot of students sitting there in the class, but their minds are somewhere else. They are not hearing what the teacher says. So that's different problems are involved. You need to have a mind, and you need to have the senses functioning properly in order to gather the information. But fundamentally, information comes only by a reflection forming a thought in the mind. And what I see is only thoughts. From that I conclude that there is an object out there. So in terms of the perception as a pratyaksha pramanam, direct perception is all the assumed or functioning in their proper order. Mind should be there, senses should be properly functioning, and enough light and other things are required in order for me to see. And if it is, I have to hear only, then I don't need to see, but my ears should be functioning. All that has to be important in order to gather or in order to have the knowledge via pratyaksha pramanam. So we are putting both the science and some of the mimamsa position in terms of vritti are all involved. So when the thought rises in the mind, then as we mentioned, the light of consciousness has to illumine the thought. So just as the light outside has to illumine the chair for me to see the chair, same way light of consciousness has to illumine the thought that rises in the mind, and the reflection of that again is the knowledge of the chair, knowledge of the thought. Just as the reflection of the chair is what I really see, same way reflection of the thought is what I really know. But the thought contents are nothing but the attributive contents of the object out there. All are involved, similar parallelism. Very interesting thing is, you said the light is required for me to see an object. Also, interestingly, light cannot be seen. Only reflected light that comes to your retina, forms an image, can be seen. So if there is no object to reflect it, then even though there is a light there, I cannot see. It's very important, because same way happens to the consciousness also. Consciousness I cannot see, I cannot be conscious of. But only when consciousness gets reflected, as when through an object or through the mind, through the reflection I have to recognize the presence of this consciousness. Through the reflection of the chair, light by the chair, I say, yes, room is lighted. How do you know? I cannot see the light. But only via reflections of the light, because I can see the chair, therefore there is a light there. So I cannot see the original light, but I can only recognize the presence of the original light via reflections only. This becomes a very important. It's the same principle applies for consciousness also. Why? I cannot see consciousness. So I cannot see, I am Satchidananda Brahman. Brahman is nothing but consciousness, but I cannot see. Why? It's all-pervading consciousness cannot be seen, just as all-pervading light cannot be seen, unless there is an object there to reflect. Same way, unless there is an object there to reflect the consciousness. The gross objects cannot reflect the consciousness, only subtle object can reflect it. And only the mind can reflect it, not the body. So body cannot reflect the consciousness, and that's why when the mind leaves that body, the dead body is there, that body is no more conscious, because consciousness as though cannot be reflected in the dead body, because the subtle body is not there. So you need a subtle body to reflect consciousness. And using the subtle body, using the reflection, I have to shift my mind to that because of which the consciousness is getting reflected. That's what essentially using the chair, using the light, using the reflection of the chair, I have to see that there is sunlight, there is a light in the room because I can see the chair there. So all these processes are exactly parallel. So if you understand the science, and in truth, you understand the science of Vedanta also. So this is what we go through in terms of why Vedanta and what is required in order to see that I am that consciousness, which is essentially I am Satchidananda Swarupam. So what exactly self-realization? All are interrelated, and we will slowly zero in on that. With that, we will stop now. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamiva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Sri Gurubhyo Namaha.